Beneath the scorching sun and vast silence of the desert lies more than just sand and stone. There are secrets, screams, and shadows waiting in the emptiness. In these three terrifying true stories, a group of teens descends into a haunted mine, a couple barely escapes a fiery murder attempt while stargazing, and a lone traveler uncovers a chilling family secret during a roadside ambush. These tales remind us, in the desert, you're never as alone as you think. The mine in the Mojave. In the dry heart of the Mojave Desert, where the land stretches endlessly under a burning sky and the wind whispers secrets through sun-scorched rocks, three high school seniors chased a thrill they would never forget. Charles was the quiet one, always reserved, always watching. But when it came to urban exploration, he was a magnet for the strange. He somehow always knew where to look: dead malls, forgotten tunnels, half-buried buildings no one remembered. And now, he'd found something different, something darker. It started with a blurry screenshot from a nearly empty Instagram account. Grainy images of crumbling desert structures. The caption read, "Dozens of abandoned mine shafts in the Mojave. If you know where to look, that was all it took." By the following Saturday, Charles had convinced two of his friends, James and the narrator, his longtime best friend, to drive out with him. The narrator owned a beat-up Jeep Wrangler, perfect for off-road chaos. Their destination? A GPS pin Charles dropped into the middle of nowhere, far beyond cell reception and sanity. As the Wrangler rumbled off the last trace of pavement and into the dirt, civilization disappeared behind them. They passed nothing for miles, no fences, no signs, not even the skeletons of old buildings. Just rock, brush, and heat. James grumbled from the back seat, growing more skeptical by the mile. He accused Charles of being duped by some troll account. Charles ignored him, eyes glued to his offline map like a man possessed. Just when the mood soured to near mutiny, James pointed out something in the distance. A collapsed structure, hunched like a broken back against the slope of a hill. As they neared, the boys realized it was a mine entrance, narrow, sunken, and braced by ancient-looking wooden beams. Part of the entrance had caved in, but a dark hollow remained. Charles was smug. "Told you," he said as he dropped a new pin on his map. They parked and geared up. Charles had even packed particle masks. For the dust, he claimed, but they'd prove useful for far worse. The mine sloped downward, not a sheer drop, but steep enough to demand careful footing. Loose gravel crunched under their boots as they descended, beams creaking faintly above them. The deeper they went, the colder the air became, and quieter. The kind of silence that presses against your eardrums and makes your heartbeat sound like a drumbeat. Eventually, the tunnel flattened out. Before them stretched a forgotten underworld, splintered beams, rusted tracks, and scattered debris buried beneath years of dust. They picked a direction and started walking, flashlights casting eerie cones of light ahead. There was no talking now. The atmosphere was thick, almost sacred in its stillness. Then came the noise, a faint drag, a low scrape, like something being pulled across rock. They froze. Charles whispered for them to kill the lights. Total darkness swallowed them. In the pitch black, the sound returned, closer this time. A steady scrape. Metal, maybe wood, definitely deliberate. They held their breath. Then came a sudden clang, metallic, echoing. Something had been dropped. And then, the scream. It was inhuman. Deep and raw, tearing through the tunnel like a blade through flesh. The walls vibrated with the sound. It wasn't just heard, It was felt. James's flashlight flicked on in panic and just as quickly went dark again. Too late. The boys ran. Adrenaline turned their limbs into blurs. Behind them, they heard movement. Quick, erratic, echoing. The narrator was in the rear when he tripped on an exposed rail. He went down hard, his shoe ripped from his foot. Pain exploded in his ankle, but he didn't stop. Half barefoot, he tore through the darkness, stumbling toward the incline. Charles and James were already climbing when he reached the slope. Every step was agony, splinters, rocks, cold sweat. But he didn't stop until he collapsed into the sunlight, lungs burning, foot shredded. James took the wheel as the narrator barely slammed the car door shut. They peeled off into the wasteland, kicking up clouds of dust behind them. At the hospital, the narrator received a tetanus shot, dozens of splinters removed. Days later, limping but curious, the trio returned, just to the entrance. James's wallet was gone, but the narrator's shoe was there, sitting in the dirt, mangled, and covered in bite marks. Real, jagged teeth marks. They didn't speak on the ride back. They haven't gone exploring since. Ashes in the sand. Tiki and Darren had always loved the wild. Forest trails, mountain lakes, rainy afternoons in canvas tents. But this time, they wanted something different, something emptier. A few weeks into spring, they picked a spot deep in the desert, far from the nearest town. No signal, no bathrooms, just open sky and stars. It was Darren's idea to head out toward a legal but remote camping area he'd found in a dusty corner of the internet. No light pollution, the listing had said. Pristine stargazing. That was the hook. Since their first date, lying on the hood of his truck with a joint and a telescope app, stargazing had been their thing. The desert sounded perfect. They left early Friday morning, loaded up the truck, and drove 3 hours into silence. The final stretch was a narrow dirt road that stretched like a cracked vein through the landscape. No signs, no fences, no sound. The sun beat down like a curse. When they arrived, the world felt hollow. No people, no tracks, just scrub, stone, and heat waves. Tiki, her auburn hair tied up in a messy knot, stepped out and scanned the horizon. It's like we're on another planet. For the first 2 nights, it was paradise. They sat around a small fire, watching stars burn through the sky. The silence was rich, calming, until it wasn't. Both nights, around the same time, they heard a low moan in the distance. Long, strange, almost mournful. It didn't sound human, but it didn't sound natural either. Darren shrugged it off as coyotes or wind over the rocks. Tiki seemed unconvinced, but let it go. We're city kids in a desert, she laughed. Every noise is a ghost out here. On the 3rd night, the real nightmare began. It was past midnight. The fire had burned down to embers. Darren was half asleep, swaying in and out of a dream when he heard it. Footsteps, not animal padding or wind brushing. Heavy, slow, deliberate steps, crunching over dry soil. He opened his eyes, frozen beneath the weight of dread. Every instinct screamed to move, to wake Tiki. But he couldn't. His body was locked in fear. The steps stopped just outside the tent. Silence stretched thin. Then came the flick of a lighter. An orange flame flickered through the thin tent fabric. Small, held waist-high, glowing in the dark. Darren's breath caught. The flame stayed still, then began to sway, slowly moving side to side. A show. A warning. The flame grew suddenly, unnaturally. Whoever was outside had lit something. It was dropped with a dull thump. Seconds later, the edge of the tent glowed orange. Then came the heat. Tiki shot up at the first crackle of fire. Darren grabbed the flashlight and yanked the zipper open. They kicked out their gear, bags, water jugs, phones, and bolted into the open desert. Tiki emptied the jug on one side of the blaze, while Darren stomped on the spreading flames. Their voices were panicked, but the desert swallowed the sound. Eventually, they smothered it. Half the tent was gone. Darren grabbed the flashlight and swept the area. Nothing. No one. Just an endless curtain of shadow. Tiki, shaking, began repacking their gear. "We have to go," she whispered. They moved fast. No trail markers, no compass. Just the hope they were walking toward the truck. 10 minutes in, the first scream echoed behind them. Long, tortured, wrong. It was the same sound from the previous nights, but louder, closer. Then came another, and another, all behind them, all overlapping like a chorus of agony. They didn't speak, just ran. Somehow, by miracle or blind luck, they stumbled upon the truck. Darren fired it up, and they tore through the darkness, jostling over every rut and dip in the path. He couldn't go fast, it was too easy to flip, but every second felt like death clawing at the tailgate. Once they hit pavement, Darren didn't stop until headlights from other cars appeared in the distance. Tiki sat beside him, clutching the seatbelt, trying not to cry. They called the police from a gas station 2 towns away. The cops said they'd send someone to check it out, but Darren doubted they would. Who investigates a phantom arsonist in a place without roads? To this day, he doesn't know who or what tried to burn them alive that night. But he never went camping again. The name she never spoke. For most of his life, Alejandro knew his mother had secrets. She was loving, intelligent, and fiercely private, especially when it came to her past. Born and raised in a rough border town in northern Mexico, she'd moved to the US for college and never looked back. She never mentioned her parents, never shared childhood stories. Any questions about her upbringing were met with jokes or carefully crafted silence. Alejandro, born and raised in Arizona, had learned not to push. But he remembered one night as a kid, he must have been around 10, waking up to use the bathroom and hearing his mother talking softly in the dark living room. She was on the phone, speaking Spanish. He didn't understand most of it, but one name kept repeating. R. Not like an initial, but a name spoken carefully, with weight. When he flipped on the light, she didn't flinch. She just looked at him with a cold, unreadable expression and told him to go back to bed. He never forgot that. Years later, now in his 20s, Alejandro had just graduated college. One afternoon, while driving across the Arizona desert to visit an old friend, he started calling people to pass the time. Music felt stale. Podcasts bored him. Eventually, he called his mom. They chatted about soccer, Champions League brackets, underdog picks, predictions. She always had a good eye for the game. It felt normal. Until he saw the trucks. 2 pickup trucks were parked across the highway up ahead, angled to block both lanes. It didn't look like a crash. It looked intentional. His grip tightened on the steering wheel. His mother was still talking on the phone, oblivious. He slowed down. Before he could react further, 3 men jumped out, one from each truck and another from behind a cactus-lined ditch. All carried rifles. One approached his driver's side window and tapped the barrel on the glass. Alejandro froze. Another vehicle pulled up behind him, boxing him in. He hadn't hung up on his mom. She was still on the line, still talking. The man gestured with his gun for Alejandro to step out. Slowly he obeyed, hands up, phone still connected. They searched him, took his keys, wallet, phone, everything. One of them slid into the driver's seat of his still running truck. Then Alejandro saw something strange. The man didn't hang up the phone. Instead, he sat there, staring at the screen. Then he spoke. Alejandro couldn't hear through the closed window, but it was clear he was talking to someone. His mother was still on the call. The man's lips moved deliberately. Alejandro watched in disbelief as the man nodded, paused, then said something else. And then he mouthed a name. Road, the same name from years ago, the one his mother never explained, the name she had whispered in the dark. Soon, the other two men approached the vehicle. They exchanged words, short, measured. Then all three turned to look at Alejandro. Their expressions were different now, appraising, curious. The man in the truck opened the door, stepped out and handed everything back, keys, phone, even his ID. He kept the cash. Tax, the man said in a heavy accent, flashing a smile that didn't reach his eyes. Alejandro didn't wait to be told twice. He jumped into his truck and drove. All three vehicles veered off into the desert, disappearing into the endless sand. None of the trucks had license plates. His hands trembled on the wheel. Later, he called his mother back and demanded an explanation. She claimed she had threatened to call the police, that she was tracking his location, that she had pleaded for his safety. Alejandro didn't believe her. The way the man spoke her name, R, suggested something more, something old, something powerful. He began to wonder, who was his mother, really? What had she left behind in Mexico? And more disturbingly, had she ever truly left it behind? That night haunted him, not just the ambush, or the guns, or the eerie silence of the desert. It was the phone call. It was how quickly everything changed when the name R was spoken. He hasn't confronted her yet, because deep down, Alejandro is afraid the truth might change everything.